you'll see that I was on Piers Morgan. They filmed it today, 11 a.m. my time. So should be seeing that footage within the next 24 hours. And I wanted to take a moment to debrief from that, and kind of talk about the experience with Arturo, and also to talk about some of the things that I felt like I wasn't allowed to say, because of the format of the show. So, they contacted me and was asking me to comment on this horrendous crime where this white Ukrainian immigrant was killed on a subway by a black man. And this is a video that's circulating on the internet. And the first time I heard about the story was a couple of days ago when trolls were under my post, and it was just under random posts, and they were showing me the story, and they're like, "Well, you didn't say anything about this." And I'm like, well, this is my first time hearing about this. I mean, I'm a journalist, but I primarily, and everyone has their specialty, right? Like, I just wrote an environmental piece. I consulted environmental professors. This was something pertaining to race, and I'm an expert on race, so that's why I was consulted. But ultimately, I kinda had a feeling from the moment I was invited to go on Piers Morgan's show that it was a setup. You know, I talked to my mom, I talked to Arturo, I talked to a couple of other colleagues to see if I should do it, and I did eventually decide to do it. One of the most interesting things that came up on the show was that he was trying to suggest that there's this double standard, that we're willing to listen to stories and pay homage to stories about Black people and people of color being mistreated, but for some reason we're not willing to listen to stories about white people being harmed. That was a completely false narrative, and it was a very hostile type experience where everyone was talking over me. It was four of us on the show. It's myself, Mark Lamont, and two white people. And, that's no disrespect to them, but I have to just look through my notes to find out what their names were, because just as much as I'm a stranger to them, to me, I don't know you either. The only people I knew was Pierce Morgan and Mark Lamont. So that's important context. And it was about an hour long footage. I did, for my own safety and security, record the entire thing and kept a transcript of that, just in case any of that is used in a misleading way. Um, and also, I would say that they did invite me to come on the show in the future. So obviously, even though I found it contentious, it must have been satisfactory to some extent on their end. Um, and I guess I wanted to say, this is the part they didn't let me get across, right? They kept trying to make it seem like Black people like me who advocate for racial justice, that we approve of the type of violence that happened to that Ukrainian white woman, and that's not true. That is a tragedy. I'm a woman. There's a lot of violence against women, femicide in the United States and throughout the global community. And I feel like everyone I've talked to, no one has been like, "Oh, let's justify this." So I feel like that assumption is like they came into the conversation with an assumption that we were justifying the behavior. And even when Piers Morgan was the first one to cite his mental health problems, and another one of the white guests, the man, he was citing the mental health problems that the person had in the past. Allegedly, the person had schizophrenia. And then when I brought up the mental health concern, they said that I was making an excuse, or that I was trying to justify horrible things, um, that he allegedly did. And that's absolutely not. I started my conversation. So I don't know what parts they're going to show you, but I started the conversation by sharing condolences for her family, her friends, and everyone impacted. I then moved on to provide statistics, because the far right is using this crime, this horrible tragedy of this white woman being killed. They're using this tragedy to try to promote racist policies, to try to justify over policing our community. And as we're seeing in DC, as has been threatened in New Orleans, as we're seeing already take place in Los Angeles, in New York. And so right now, these may seem like silly debates to some people, I realize. But ultimately, how the public feels about these things is going to determine policy going forward. It's going to determine who we elect, who we see as a solution. How do we see the solution, right? And so I took part in this conversation, and here are the statistics I provided them, that they kept talking over me and pretended like this wasn't relevant. So I talked about violent crime decreasing. Uh, in Washington, D.C., over the past year, there's been a 31% decrease, 29% in Baltimore and also 29% in Charlotte, North Carolina, and that's where this crime happened. So we can walk and chew gum, is what I told them. We can acknowledge that this heinous crime happened, and we don't want people to be hurt. We don't want people to be hurt on public transportation, no matter what they look like. However, it's not right to cherry pick cases and make it seem as if crime is elevating when the statistics simply do not represent that. And I understand that Pierce Morgan, in my opinion, seems to have a bit of a superiority complex and thinks that he's more intelligent. But to me, an intelligent person is responsive to the facts. And the facts at hand are no matter how impassioned or how hurtful it was to see that white woman murdered, it doesn't change the fact that that's not reflective of everyday life in Charlotte, North Carolina, nor is it in Washington or New Orleans or any of these places. Another statistic I provided was about hate crimes. Look it up on the FBI's website. Black people are the racial group who are most likely to be victims of hate crimes. Following that on the racial level would be Latinos. So white people are not even the second most likely to be victims of hate crimes. Another statistic I brought up that they dismissed is that Black people are more than 7 times as likely to be wrongfully convicted of crimes. So while the white man on the show, not Pierce Morgan, but the white guest, while he kept bringing up 2 stats, he brought up the fact that Black people are the most likely to be arrested for murder and that intra-racial, we're the most likely. I brought up the fact that intra-racial crime is very similar between Black and white people. And in terms of him saying Black people are the group that kills the most people, that is offset by the fact that Black people are 7.5 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted. So while
Right.
we're arrested and accused of murder, that's not reflective of our actual rate at which we are killing people. Not that any of this is okay, guys. Not that any of this violence is okay. But what we can't do is we can't let information be weaponized in the way that the far right is in cherry picking stories. When we talk, Pierce Morgan said it was a double standard that we were talking about George Floyd and that we weren't talking about this case. He ignores 2 things. First of all, last month, unfortunately, a Black woman was stabbed in Tulsa, Oklahoma by a white man. He didn't say anything. Neither did that white woman on the show. Neither did the white man on the show. That's important context. I brought that statement up 4 times. So if that doesn't come across when the video is released, then that would be a misrepresentation of the facts. Another point would be that when we go back to the George Floyd perspective, the reason that story was so big and the reason that people like me cover those stories is not just simply because they're Black, but because they're reflective of a broader pattern of racism. Let's say, for example, the mappingpolice.org, you can find out that Black people are killed at nearly 3 times the rate as white people. So when you have that type of statistic and you find an example, it's appropriate to bring up that example because it's reflective of a broader pattern. If, however, you're bringing up an example of a Black man stabbing a white woman and it's not reflective of a pattern, focusing on that can give people the wrong impression. And just
Right.
as calmly as I'm saying this right now, I was not allowed to get all of that out.
Yeah, and I sort of when we talked on the phone before you did the show, I sort of tried to prepare you for that because that's what happens on that show. People talk over each other. And, my experience in doing live debate type stuff on news type of shows, um, is that, there's also the editing aspect where you were saying, the misrepresentation of the facts. And they might more than likely they'll post the whole show. Where they're gonna get you is with the clips that they post on social media. So, you know what I'm saying? They're gonna make it look like you got owned, they're
Yeah.
gonna make it look like this and look at how dumb this argument is, that type of stuff. So, when it comes to and I know you told Pierce that he was far right and he got
That was the
mad.
biggest thing that me and him
Right.
personally went back and forth on. He felt like I didn't know who he was because I called him far right. But maybe it's because I'm on the left. But to me, he does seem far right. And you will, if you watch the entire show. Oh, hi, Dr. Mayor Marshall. The name of the show it's Pierce Morgan Uncensored. You can watch it on YouTube or on Fox. Fox 8 is also streaming his show. It's not out yet, but they're going to release it.
It'll more than likely be out sometime today. I would assume.
They usually do same day, and especially because 'cause they're trying to capitalize on the momentum from the stores. But, to me, it was a contentious, situation. I do feel like from a I do think that it was interesting to me. I called him far right and he took that offensive. I told him, I
Yeah.
said, my intention is not to misrepresent you, but that is my opinion because of what my political ideology is. To me, you are far
Right.
right. And he said, name one far right thing I did. And then they just like panned into me. And I'm like, well, the way that you're approaching this story is from a
Right.
far right perspective. Of course, being on the far right, he found that as a cop out. So ultimately, he brought it up at least three times about me calling him far right, and he said, "Well, I'm far right." He's like, "You're far right." Like he even did like a little childish, "You're far right." So I
Right.
left, and he said, "Well, yeah, that's absurd." And I guess his joke was, "Well, it's absurd to call me far right," and it's like, no, people who know me will know that you're absurd for calling me far right. Me calling you far right is
Right.
just my interpretation of the things I've seen you say. And as a pro-Black woman, as a woman who cares about these things, that is your perspective. And I'll give you one example on this show that we're talking about. So there was a part where Pierce Morgan, unprovoked, brings up the fact that a trans person was responsible for a mass shooting, right? Now we know trans people are probably only, I have to look it up, but a long time ago they were probably like 1 or 2% of the population. A very small amount of people for you to even scientifically be able to say anything about. The smaller a population is, the harder it is to extrapolate anyway. So it's absurd anyway. But he brought it up. And he was this was his point of contention. He was frustrated that the media, he felt like, um issued an apology for misgendering them. And he was like, he was going at Mark Lamont and saying, "Why do you think that's okay? That they could apologize to a murderer?" Like he tried to make it about that. And I just said, I just tried to get my little soundbite. I said, journalistic integrity. Because no matter
Right.
how you feel about
Right.
trans people, if I write something and it's inaccurate, then I do have a responsibility to go and
Right.
correct the record to the best of my ability. And I think that, he was ignoring that. On one hand, he was like, "You guys aren't good at journalists because you're not paying attention to the story I want you to pay attention to." And on the other hand, he kept ignoring the example. And it was so interesting because as he was closing out the show, I kind of made a snarky comment. He was like saying, he was talking about, he kept trying to ring this, so he was convinced to making a point. He wasn't open to learning during the conversation. He was just convinced to say what he was gonna say no matter what. Because this is what he said. He said, "If the tables were turned and it was a white man who did this to a Black woman." And I said, "Well, that happened last month. That happened in August, and you didn't report on it. You didn't say anything about it. And neither did any of the people on the show."
Right.
So
And
even I didn't
that's
write about that story because I wasn't privy to it. But my point is, if you're going to call out selective empathy and selective reporting, then why didn't you report on this Black woman who her throat was slashed by a random white man on a public bus in Tulsa, Oklahoma? And he would not
right.
address that point. He kept just being, next point,
Right.
just
Like
hopping around.
he can claim he's not far right all he wants. But the fact that he's promoting this narrative about that murder, the horrifying freaking murder,
Exactly.
and the trans issue, and then misinterpreting all of that,
That
he's
pushes on the
promoting
right.
he's promoting far right culture war stuff. And that doesn't serve anybody. All it does is it serves to oppress non-white people. It's the same thing as saying, just because he cut that woman's throat, all black people want to kill white people. Or like when Trump was on the campaign trail, basically making every Latino seem like a criminal. And now look at where we're at now. There are policies and laws that were passed that target the Latino community based on that false narrative, and that false narrative is a culture war. And despite all of that being a lie, now you have an administration trying to prove that it's true by arresting innocent people and lumping them in with the two or three pedophiles that they pick up when they do a massive sweep of 100, 200 people. So, they essentially equate the three pedophiles or the guy who was convicted of a violent crime, they equate that to, they plant that on every immigrant they take in,
Right.
whether it's an immigrant who was taken doing everything the legal way and taking as they were going out of court and taken into custody, they'll lump them in and issue a press release with, "We arrested so many hundred people. Here are these six pedophiles." And the way they word it, they make it seem like everybody's a criminal. That's exactly what they're doing right now with this narrative. And, when you get to the point when he starts talking about journalistic integrity, because we're not talking about this murder, he didn't talk about the one you mentioned, And
Bingo.
we can't possibly talk about every murder that happens every day. There's like
Exactly.
50 a day or something like that. You know what I'm
Exactly.
saying? So that was and you know, I saw a TikTok from the reporter that's been on this story since it happened. That murder that happened with the black man happened 3 weeks ago. And
Right.
it's just now becoming a big thing because the video was released.
Bingo.
And she discussed how mainstream media, the big corporate media outlets, took the local news reporting story, reframed it, repackaged it, created their own narrative, and now it's a race issue.
Right.
And that's not what this story was about from the get go. She was talking about how
Absolutely.
every local news station has been on this story since day one, and it was never about this until that video came
Let me
out.
ask you a question because I wasn't sure. Pierce Morgan kept repeating this thing like it was a fact. And if it is, that's fine. But I want to know, they said that he mentioned something racial. That he mentioned I got that white girl. Did you is that
I
audio is that valid or is that just something that's being repeated on right wing
I don't
media?
know. I don't know that that's valid. I haven't seen anything in the local
Because the
reporting.
video doesn't have audio. So how do
Right.
you know that that's what he said?
Unless he said it after the fact to somebody, but if it's not actually documented, then it's just hearsay, right? So and you know, when it comes to the far right, again, Piers Morgan, they're going to bring this up even though there are no facts or data, you know, to back it up. So, you know, because it's a narrative and it helps promote their narrative. It's that confirmation bias
It
we deal with
is.
all the time.
Right.
And that's essentially based on what you've told me so far when we were on the phone earlier today. That's what felt like this conversation was. And it's, you know, Pierce Morgan isn't a journalist, so I don't expect journalistic integrity from him. I do expect it from the producers and the people on his staff. You
Right.
know, I get he's a loudmouth personality, and he's kind of the Howard Stern, so to speak,
Right.
right? And I get that, but you know, there's a responsibility there from the production team and the crew to fact check things, correct things, and if they don't, then they're complicit. So you have to look at Piers Morgan's show as it's not just him that's far right. It's the people that are allowing him to say the things he's saying without checking him. And that's
Right.
it.
And there's this gap between them being far right and them believing they're in the center. Being
Right.
anti-trans is not a center position.
It is not.
That is a right position. Now, being a moderate, I mean, what would even be the moderate position on trans rights? That they just exist, right? I mean,
Right.
I'm assuming because I'm not a moderate. I don't know. But I can say on the left, our position is that they should have equal rights, access to opportunities, be treated with dignity and respect.
Right.
Why is that considered so radical when that's what we all want as people, right?
Right. And we're not nobody is, you know, everybody pretty much everybody at this point knows I raised a trans kid, right? So like
Right.
nobody's asking for special treatment. Nobody's asking for trans people to be treated right. They just want to be treated equally. They're people. At the end of the day, they are people. And if, you know, if gender confirming care helps them feel better about themselves, then fine. What's wrong with that? I get the whole argument about, you know, sex change operations on minors, which
But
don't
that
happen.
wasn't happening.
Right, it doesn't happen. It's a rarity. You know, people always bring up that show I Am Jazz, right? Because she had these operations when she was like 16 or whatever. That's the exception, not the rule.
Right.
Most doctors won't do it. They won't do anything permanent. So like gender affirming
That's like
care,
a teenager getting a boob job. Most teenagers
right.
don't get breast augmentation, don't get BBLs. You usually have to be an adult to get that type of stuff done.
Did anybody care when Jennifer Love Huge Tits Hewitt Jennifer Love Hewitt got her parents paid for a sex change operation when she was 16? No, nobody cared about that. That's gender affirming care. You
Right.
know, when you see all these women in the White House getting their faces done so they all look the same, that's sort of gender affirming care, you know?
Yeah, even though I don't even
Um
even though as a woman I renounce that if because like because I tend to think their faces look and I'm not trying to be mean, but Imma just say it, they look botched. So because they look botched, I tend to think that they should not be doing that. I mean, I we're all ble if we're getting older, we're blessed to be alive. One of the things that pissed me off
Absolutely.
that they did though is when I told them the crime rates were low, and I think this was a little bit of jealousy because they hadn't done the research I did. So because I
Right.
was able to say that the crime had dropped 31% in DC, 29% in Baltimore, 29% in Charlotte, where the crime happened, their response was, "Well, this isn't about that." Well, yes,
Of
it
course
is
not.
because you're using this case to try to
Right.
suggest that there's some type of unhinged thing that going on here, and that's not true.
The only unhinged thing going on here is white men shooting up schools and shit.
Yep.
Like right before we started this live, news broke that a shooting occurred at a Charlie Kirk event at some Utah college, where he goes to run his mouth. And I have to think that that's inevitable. Whether
Right.
it's a far right shooter or a leftist shooter,
Right.
he provokes people in that way, and he provokes people on both sides when he's on the college campus. So when you want to talk about what's a broader social issue, it's guys like Charlie Kirk who are paid by billionaires to drive stories like this one, to drive narratives that suggest all black people want to kill white people or something like that,
Yeah,
when it's
Charlie
actually
Kirk
the
is
opposite.
despicable. He
It
is
is. It
he's a
is.
liar, he's a bigot, he's a cowardly white supremacist. And for one, I don't really care that he has a platform because ultimately I'm not the type that likes to hide my problems
Right.
under the rug. I rather just put the rug outside and beat the rug and sweep the whole house. So I don't mind that he exists and he does what he does. But he's absolutely wrong in his theory of how this society functions. And he's guided by prejudice. And he denies
Absolutely.
it, but it's clear in everything they said. And I kind of felt like, as much as Piers Morgan didn't like me calling him far right, why don't you look in a political science textbook and look up the definition of what being on the right politically means, and then, you know, look at your own position. What is your opinion on gender rights? What is your position on women's rights? These are not, so a centrist position would be women need to maintain the rights they had, right? A right position would have been they wanted to get rid of our rights, right?
Right.
There is a middle, left, and center to everything that we have. All policies are like that. So same thing with affirmative action. There's a left perspective on it that it's necessary. There's a center, which used to be let's maintain it, which now has moved to let's never, let's keep it the same, which is not have it. And then the right is let's get rid of it. So theirs is keep it gone, right? There's a perspective. So it's like, I'm not saying someone's far right from an ignorant perspective or being mean or, and not the only thing
Right.
is you got 8 million followers. So I'm not punching, you can't accuse me of punching down on you when you're the one with the big platform and you keep cutting people off rather
You
than us
punching up.
have, yeah,
You're punching up. I mean, bottom line, he has the platform, he has the money, he has the show, the name recognition, he has all those things. So essentially, the way I take it is he sort of invited you because he wanted to punch down, right? He wanted to prove his case, which is a far right case, no matter how much he denies it. He
right.
thinks that because he criticizes Trump from here, that he's a moderate, that
Yeah,
he's not
that's
far right.
all this is.
But dude, neo Nazis are criticizing Donald Trump. You know what I mean? So
Right.
like, you don't get much more far right than that, and you can't use criticizing Trump as, look, I'm not far right because I criticize Trump. His views and everything he stands for. Like, I mean, we could go all the way back to the October 7th thing when he was demanding people uh, 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 condemn Hamas or whatever.
Mhm.
Do you condemn Hamas in the middle of an interview? And it's like, dude, let a person answer the question before you start throwing that out there. That's some far right
That is.
colonialist bullshit, you
That
know?
is.
So, like, do you condemn the people that are fighting against their occupation? I don't. I mean,
Right.
if somebody was doing that to my kids, my family, my neighborhood, and everybody I know, you can bet I'm going to take up arms against those people. I'm not just going to stand here and take it.
All of us
So,
have the right to self-defense. All human beings
right,
and even animals have it's a natural reaction to when you're being attacked. And it's just like black people, like they get mad at us for having the enslaved people's uprisings, but we would have never needed that had you not enslaved our people. Resistance
right,
is produced out of the conditions that a group of people are made to endure. So I think that's the
right,
part that a lot of people are missing. Like it doesn't come out of just nowhere.
right. And we go back to the whole colonialism idea, and that's the mentality, right? That's the stuff that's been bred into white folks in Europe, white folks here, this whole superiority complex where, if you're brown or a little darker than them, or even if like me, you're white but from Latin America, you aren't white. You are inferior to them. And that has been evident on Twitter, especially for me recently when I've been posting screenshots from the Red Dot app showing ICE locations in Chicago, right? All these motherfuckers keep telling me, they keep calling me Mexican for one, like we're all the fucking same, even though I have a Cuban flag in my in my profile or my name, and they just constantly just pushing this narrative of they're superior to me. Meanwhile, they can't type a freaking tweet without you know what I'm saying, without sounding or misspelling or just looking moronic. And, I clap back on them. I talk shit. I block them, but not until after I talk shit. And, it's just ridiculous. I hear people tell me all the time, you're not white thing, go back to where you came from, call me spick, call me all these things. And that's because of that whole mentality that Pierce Morgan encapsulates. Like he is the embodiment of systemic racism. And his rhetoric helps bolster that systemic racism because like we said a few minutes ago, this kind of narrative leads to policies that impact an entire community. One guy did a bad thing, right?
Right,
Same with immigration. One guy did a bad thing, and all of a
right,
sudden, every Latino's a murderer. Every
right.
immigrant's a
It's
murderer.
disgusting.
Because, right, right,
Remember
and
what
it's
remember what Trump said years ago when he said, um, he was calling Mexicans rapists and murderers. So it's like we saw the blatant racial discrimination, stereotyping going on. And
and
honestly, to me, it just the whole experience, it was contentious. And I just honestly would have been like the human decency to be able to finish the point. It's very rude to me to ask someone a question and then within moments of them speaking to start interrupting. And me being not like naturally a mean person, you know, if you just start talking like that, I'm gonna concede to you for the most part. But there was a moment when I just was like kind of got loud. I was like, no, let me finish saying what I'm gonna say. You let other people finish. Like there is a lack of respect. Like keep in mind,
yeah,
like you're
huge
not
lack.
like I'm a doctor. Like I went to school and I'm educated on this matter. If you don't want to my subject expertise, you should have never invited me. Right?
Yeah, right. And
Simple the
like
matter.
I said, I tried to prepare you for it, but you can never really prepare for a Pierce Morgan
Didn't.
show.
You
And
can't.
and
I tried my best. You did help me, the things you said, but you could never truly prepare
right,
because it's the disingenuous nature of it that kind of caught me because it's like, well, I have a case. Like I've built a case. The case is you guys are ignoring patterns and you want to focus on this. Like for example, when women talk about domestic violence and sexual assault, we're not yeah, we might be talking about individual cases at the time, but it's reflective of a broader pattern and that's what makes
right.
I think that a lot of white people and a lot of conservatives and a lot on the far right, like Piers Morgan, they kind of have like this rate. They try to adopt a race neutral lens, but in our society is racist. So when you don't look at the power dynamics, you're missing the big picture. To try to say that this is similar to George Floyd, well, this black man didn't have the whole police force behind him. When George Floyd was killed, there were the ones participating directly, and then there were the ones standing, holding their hands on their hips, watching a person be murdered. That is not
Right.
what happened. And you know what else? Now I will give Pierce Morgan credit for one thing. He brought up the fact that a black man was actually the first to come to her aid. One of the white woman on the show, she was trying to make the point. They just watched her. They just watched her bleed out. She just made it seem like no one cared about this white woman, and that's not true. When we see people in our community, black, white, it don't even matter what you look like. If you're in trouble, we're gonna try to help you. But it happened so quickly because of the way the crime was committed. The man slit her throat, and it wasn't an argument leading up to it. So it didn't make a lot of noise. He cut her throat,
Right.
but didn't scream. He got up and just walked towards the thing. So it took a little moment for people to really know
To
what was going
realize.
on. And she tried to argue that people didn't care. But it's like it's just as much as we need to talk about the black man that took her life, we need to talk about the black man that came to her, that was the first person to come to her aid and try to render help when she was losing her life. So y'all are making it about race when in reality, one black man hurt her when another black man was just as willing to help her. Why can't
Right.
that be part of the story?
No, I mean, at the end of the day, a man did this thing to a woman. Whether she was white and he was black is kind of irrelevant because now we're glossing over femicide, right? Which
That's
is a
right. This
huge,
is a crime
huge
against
problem.
women. Right.
Right. It's a huge problem in this country.
He picked a
And
woman as a victim and not a man.
right, people like to talk in the US. The media, the government, everybody here likes to talk about femicide in other countries, how it's a problem in Mexico and it's a problem in Middle Eastern countries, but they never talk about femicide here, right? Every time, like it, for whatever reason, and on our local news, and I'm sure this is the same everywhere, but practically every day there's a murder suicide in this
Right.
city, and it's the husband kills the wife and then shoots himself. That's a murder suicide, but it's
That
also
and white men do
femicide.
that a lot. I'd have to
Right.
look up
It's
statistically to know how
right.
often, right? But I see that type of story a lot.
It's common, and the bigger the city, the more common it is, I think, so you're not gonna hear murder suicide stories a lot in rural America, but in a city like the 4th largest city in Houston or the 3rd largest city in Chicago or New York City, it probably happens in New York City, probably happens multiple times a day, and nobody they don't really wanna talk about that, When you look at, like, for example, like a male prison compared to a female prison, a women's prison is tiny compared to a male prison, right? So, like,
Mm.
obviously, we have a toxic problem with this on this end over here. I said this, and I got some clap back a little bit, but I said that no matter what we do in society, there's always going to be somebody who does some shit, right? No
Right.
matter, right? If we improve poverty, whatever, crime is definitely would decline, right? If we abolish poverty, if we got rid of poverty. But you can't say murder suicides won't happen, right? You can't say femicide won't continue to happen. You can't say acts of racism or acts of hate won't continue to happen because those are individual personal beliefs. And a lot of people, frankly, in this country, the culture is we solve our problems through the barrel of a gun. And
That
that's
has to change. That's an American
right,
culture that has to change. I'm 37. I've never owned a gun before. Not to say I never will, because if I have to, if I feel like I need to, I would. But I've never owned a gun. And when I was younger, I got robbed at gunpoint. And because I didn't have a gun, I didn't lose my life because they didn't see me as a threat. They just took my stuff and left. Like
right.
it kind of reminds me of like this childish way of thinking where conservatives think if someone lies, they steal. If they steal, they kill. They'll steal, they kill, and do all this. And it's like I got robbed by someone, and it very much clearly was their objective to get the money and the things that I had on me, and
And
not to
that's it.
hurt me. But if I had a gun, then they would have felt maybe that they had to shoot me to get away
Well,
or something like
or
that.
or you would have gotten in a shootout or something like that.
Right.
The thing about carrying weapons and stuff is it's an automatic escalation
It
just
is.
because you have it. Some people who carry concealed will hide behind it. They will talk shit. They will flip people off. They will wave their gun in their car like, "Don't fuck
Right.
with me." Right.
That's messed
I'm a
up.
gun owner. Had concealed license for a long time, carried everywhere I went when I was at work. Never once did I ever have to pull that gun, and never I didn't unless I needed to. I knew that in some instances where I had to fire a dude who was being extremely racist, and he showed up at the shop before everybody else, and he's sitting in the parking lot waiting for people to come in. I was glad I had heat on me because
Right.
I don't know what that dude's about to do. I don't know if
Right.
he's packing. Why is he blocking the driveway? Why is he standing there like all aggressive? So I
Right.
had to confront the dude and I kept my distance because I know the law. I gave him
Right.
warnings and I told him, okay, now you got to leave the property because the boss man who owns this property says you got to go. So you
Right.
got to go. And he left because he knew he worked there. He knew I was already packing heat and he knew that I was going to be the first one to show up. And that's what scared me was that he knew that I was the first one to show up every day and he knew that I had a gun on me. So why is he sitting there? He's waiting for me. Is he waiting for I don't
Right.
know who he's
It
waiting
is
for.
scary.
Right, and I fired him because He's a white dude, had a mostly Mexican crew, and the older guy, Gerardo, who everybody looked up to, he wouldn't let the dude take lunch, and he's over there eating fried chicken with his buddies, and he throws the chicken bone at him, and he's like, "That's your lunch, your lunch." And I'm like, "The fuck?" And Gerardo got up with a hammer and was gonna club the dude, and the other
Mhm.
guy stopped him. And when they told me about it, that when they got back to the shop, I'm like, "You gotta go, dude. You gotta go."
Right, you gotta
And
go.
right, like we can't be doing this. And the thing that bothers me about people like Charlie Kirk and people like Pierce Morgan and things like that is they embolden that kind of behavior. Just like this shooting at this college at the Charlie Kirk event. They
Right,
embolden this type of behavior because the minute you start saying that the only way for us right wingers to fight back is by being armed and having guns, you're making everybody else go get guns and think that in order to fight back against you,
right.
they're going to have to be armed and they're going
Does.
to,
It
and
does,
and
'cause
that's
we've
what we
had
are.
yeah, I know we've had conversations in my own household about whether we should get guns and stuff, and in New Orleans, people have been talking about, "What is the National Guard gonna do down here?" Now, for one, I know my cousin I have family who are in the National Guard. And I know I'd like to think that all of them would be, you know what I'm saying? But if you're conditioned to follow orders, I don't know. I don't know where this story ends for America. I do
Right.
see this as an escalation of fascism, of putting federal armed troops in our cities. And that's why I kept bringing up the crime statistics. Now, Piers Morgan could play games and act like it's not relevant. The crime is down 30% in most American cities. That's a pattern. I
Yeah, it's
hate when
down
people want to
30%
cherry
here.
pick and they don't want to focus on there's a pattern that's happening, and we need to be studying what's working so that we can keep up those things, adopt those things like in Baltimore. And one of the guys was like, "Oh, this is happening because of Democratic policies." It's like, well, then how could
Oh
you
God.
explain that in these cities where Democrats are mayors, the crime has decreased? Like, why are if you have to ignore the reality to make a point, you don't have a valid point.
Right, and I say that all the time. If you have to lie to make a point, then your point isn't valid. And when it comes to this kind of bigotry, because that's what it is, racism, they have to lie in order to prove their point. They have to omit certain contexts, certain details. They have to ignore the statistics, like you said. Otherwise, their narrative doesn't work. Because if you knew all the facts and if you embraced all the facts, then your argument's dead. They know that. And that's what I call the willful ignorance aspect. That's what I call the weaponization of ignorance. That's what they're doing. They're weaponizing, Charlie Kirk is weaponizing ignorance and he's getting people killed. Just like libs of TikTok, just like I can't imagine how many people, died because of the framing of libs of TikTok with trans people, drag queen story hour. Like, come on, man. Just a bunch of
When I
dudes
when I
dressed
was
like
a
women.
kid, when I was, like, probably, like, 14, 15, me and my friends, we used to go to, so in New Orleans, on Bourbon Street, when you go past a certain point, it becomes a district that I guess is, like, unofficially a gay district. Because growing up, we
Uh-huh.
just knew at that point is when the gay clubs start. And sometimes we would go with our mom's friend to go to drag shows. We loved them.
Yeah.
It wasn't all this controversy that it is about it now. It was just something that we did together. We were just like, "Oh, this is cool. It's a drag show. I can't wait to see what they wear, what they say, what they do." They were very inviting and it was fun and it had nothing to do with sex. They weren't trying to sex anybody. They were just
Right,
like,
right,
they were kind of like being like glamorous or that's the way I saw it as like a young woman. I just was like they're being glamorous, and they're very, proud of who they are, which is a
right,
big deal because, a lot of people have been made to feel ashamed, right? Not that they should feel, but a lot of people have been made to feel ashamed. So when you see that type of pride, I tend to think it's a good thing. Like people were saying all that stuff about Red Dress Run in New Orleans. I love Red Dress Run. We love decadence. I could tell you as a server, to us, that was when we got treated right, when the tips were good. And I mean, it's good for the city, it's good for them, like, I don't
right.
understand and people were trying to make, Red Dress one there and said, "Oh, this is a narrative." This has been going on for over 20 years, and it's a
Yeah,
charity event, and straight men participate in it too. Straight men wear the red dress, and because I used to work with some of them in the French Quarter, and it's so funny because they're not used to wearing dresses because they weren't actually gay or trans or anything like that, and so it was funny because they would get like short dresses and their little stuff would be hanging out. And I'm like, oh my God, get out of my restaurant. Like, I'm like, because they're like, these are my personal friends. I'm sitting there like, your literally stuff is sitting on my chair, like bare on my chair.
I didn't even think about that.
I said, you're not ladylike. I said, you need to put some
Yeah.
drawers on. Okay.
I think it's funny because, like, you see, like, the recent one, I seen some pictures of some dudes that were jacked, and they're wearing this tight dress, and it just looks funny, and the dude's in heels, and, like, motherfucker can't walk in heels, you know what I mean? Like, if I put on heels, I'm probably gonna break an ankle, you know what I'm saying? So, I think it's hilarious. I think it's fun, but, like, you saw the whole narrative, culture war narrative on the internet when pictures of the Red Dress Run were starting to be
I
posted a
know
few
we're
days
so
ago.
used to it. We look forward to it. Guess what else
Right.
we have in New Orleans? Since y'all want to not like us, let me tell you something else we do. We actually have also a naked run. Now, in the middle of the summer, I learned this because I work in the French Quarter, so you can't help but see it. One day during the summer, you're gonna see thousands of naked people just walking around, riding bikes and walking through the French Quarter. And guess what we do every
Like naked, naked?
absolutely no
Oh my
drawers or
god.
anything. So what we do when that comes, a lot of times at the restaurant, everyone will stop what they're doing. It don't matter if you have tables or not. We go out and we are like we kind of look not like on a nasty level, but just kind of curious, like, oh my God, look at all those people. Look at that person and look at that person. So the fact that y'all are outraged at a red dress run, you have no time. This is the did
Yeah,
y'all
right,
understand the French Quarter is the red light district where
right.
traditionally there used to be prostitution. Now it's mostly strip clubs, but it's still a culture, a very sex positive culture where like the French Quarter is one of the most sex positive places in the entire world. Like there's literally right on Bourbon Street when you first enter, there's Hustler Hollywood that sells sex toys. They have Hustler Strip Club on the same block. You have all these different things going on. So naked people, men in dresses, that does not bother us or in the least.
Right,
Like,
right.
so
It
outsiders are looking and they're thinking, this is an agenda. No, this is just New Orleans because it's more like a free type. Now, whether people like it or not, that's on you. You don't have to
yeah,
go to I've never participated in the naked run. I'm way too shy. I would never do anything like that. But am I would I ever say they need to stop? No, because first of all, they're doing it in the French Quarter. And traditionally in New Orleans, that's considered a place where adults can be adults. It's not a
right.
place for children. And so because of that, I tend to think it's not inappropriate, just them having fun. And honestly, you know what I love the most about it? All the people are not hot. They're normal people.
And it's
And
for
that's
charity,
why I say
right?
it's not really about sex. I think it's about something different for them. I think it's about freedom for them. So I just respect it. I don't say just because I don't participate in it doesn't mean I want to stop it. And I think when people try to falsely equivocate the far left and the far right, I think that's where they mess it up. Because the thing about me is I do have my ideals of how I think the world should be, but I don't force others. And I don't force my beliefs onto others. I feel like conservatives, whether you like it or not, it's you trying to stop them from expressing themselves and stopping them from being free that to me crosses the line. And it's the same thing with black people. And look at what the Supreme Court did, because we didn't even talk about that on here yet. We talked about it on the phone or somewhere. Sometime we talked about it. But the Supreme Court giving ICE authority to racially and ethnically discriminate against Latinos. And we know that the unsaid part about that is the way the law works, that's a precedent. So that works for black people too. That works for black immigrants. And that also works for other federal law enforcement, such as the FBI, and that sort of thing in terms of and it trickles down to states too, because well, if it's federally permissible to discriminate. Now, I will say this for Louisiana, we are the mass incarceration capital of the world. I think people need to know that. I would say that I guess it's like the problem is like people start to assume that if you just imprison a bunch of people, you're gonna have a safer society. And we're kind of like a case study for why that's not true.
Right.
Um, I think that people just they're like stuck on these stereotypes and stuck on their assumptions, and they've a lot of people on the right have become impervious to reality, and they falsely equivocate. If you choose the far left, what you're going to get is healthcare. What you're going to get is clean air, land, and water. What you're going to get is public education, for K through 12 and possibly college too, if you go far left. You're going to get social services. You're going to get care for a child care. You're going to get more affordable medicine, more affordable, food, clothing. You're going to get a more working class environment. That's not to say that the Democratic Party always embodies all of those things. They have work to do. But if you want to talk about the left, that's what they represent. Now let's do the opposite. Now on the right, if they have what they want, we're back in Jim Crow, where we have slave
Right.
patrols that are openly discriminating against white people. But I said the difference is Louisiana is this: we never stop racial profiling. So in New York and some other places, and you know this because you're down south, Arturo, they never did stop and
No.
frisk down here. If you look up stop and frisk and put in quotes New Orleans, the people down here, the law enforcement in Louisiana, have justified maintaining it. So a lot of Americans that are up north are under the impression that this is a return of something, when in reality, this is a nationalization of Southern policies.
Right. Yeah. There's a common misconception that the Supreme Court at one time banned racial profiling, and they never have. They never have. And the all they did was basically add qualifiers, and so this decision that was handed down the other day, on Monday, it's definitely a decision that's going to impact multiple communities. It may be that they decided this to target Latinos, right? But like you said,
Right.
if federal law enforcement can do this, any one of them, any group is on, can be a target. And when you look at the history, particularly the FBI, and you don't have to go far. You look at the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement when the FBI was populating lists of black identity extremists. And they weren't just putting black people on that list. There was some people who supported Black Lives Matter, white people, Latinos, and stuff like that,
Yeah.
that were also on that black identity extremist list. And you like I said, you go back to the civil rights era, right? And they spied on Martin Luther King, they called him all kinds of names, and then they had the, infiltrating Latino movements, United Farm Workers, all of it, from the Black Panthers to I mean everybody. And where we're at now is they essentially open the door to allow that more openly. So like now they don't have to say, no, this wasn't racial profiling. I pulled you over because you had a busted taillight, or
They
you
just gonna
looked
say I
like you
pulled you
were
over
swerving.
because you Latino. Now what? Now
Right,
what?
right, right. Because like today, after that Supreme Court decision today, they started stopping people in their cars at a traffic light, pulling them
Right.
out of there, yanking them out of their cars. There's a video floating around where they tried to grab a pregnant woman out of her car,
It's
and like
it's
they were being
terrifying when you see
violent.
those videos of them breaking the window. They got masks on their face.
Yeah,
They are Nazis. And that's
they
another
are.
thing that Piers Morgan and me disagreed about. He's like, y'all call Trump a Nazi, and all this stuff like that. They're like, that discredits you. He's putting people in an alligator concentration camp. We get to call him a Nazi. He said
Right,
his Supreme Court picks are saying racial discrimination is okay. We get to call him a Nazi. We do not have to wait until there's a mass genocide. Like, why
right,
do they think we have to wait? And then we see what's going on with Palestinians. Even if there is a genocide, even if there is death, these people are so disingenuous. They will not even admit it's a genocide, even after most of the population is dead. You've wiped them off the
right,
planet of Earth and you still won't say it's a genocide. We see the same with indigenous people. What Americans did to indigenous people, what white Americans did was genocide, but we don't talk about it that way.
right. Yeah, and going back again to the whole problem with like people like Piers Morgan is that it's almost like he doesn't even put any thought into his ideas. He just like he just repeats what he sees on the internet and be like, yeah, that
No, he
seems
doesn't do it
logical.
at all.
Right. He's like, that seems logical, and he runs with it. And then when you try to push back, he gets offended. So, you're sitting here kind of glossing over the fact that there's genocide. You're glossing over the fact that we have systemic racism issues. I mean, he's far right, whether he likes it or not. I mean, he can
And
get
that
mad at
that was that
everybody.
was our biggest that was the biggest thing that well, he made that the biggest thing. I will say that. He
Right.
made that the biggest thing. I was willing to talk about anything and everything. He kept circling back to this point of feeling offended that I called him far right. Not to mention, of course, he didn't say which one he was talking about, me or Mark Lamont, but because he knows Mark, I think he was talking about me. You called me a far left lunatic.
Yeah.
If you and I have the transcript, and it's going to be published. But ultimately, you didn't say that directly, like you are a far, but you said, well, we just had an example of a far left lunatic. So, let me get this right, chump. Right? Me calling you far right, even though people on the left consider you far right, is wrong, but you calling me a far right lunatic is wrong. Like me calling you, you know what I mean, is okay. Me calling you far right can be substantiated by your political position on things. Look at the way you've mistreated Meghan Markle. You know what I'm saying? That's a perfect example.
Right.
The way
Right.
you that's and that's I haven't looked into all of the drama, but I believe that was a big part of the reason why he ended up going independent. Correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think, he said he went independent because he was, being constrained by whatever, whether it was in England or whether it was Fox, because he was on Fox for a few, like 3 or 4
And it looks
years.
like they still like him enough to where when I looked up, his show, Fox 8 looks like they projected too. I'm just adding my little 2
Yeah.
cents.
No, and I think he's about to be his show is about to be broadcast in the UK again on Channel 5 or something.
I think this young guy telling
I
hold
tried to
on.
go I tried to go to that channel and they're like, "Oh, you're not in the UK. This is a UK only website." And I'm like,
Right.
"What the heck?" I'm like, "All right, I guess I'm not allowed to check out their news site." But yeah, he's about to be I think I saw an article earlier that's saying that it was like 5 days ago that said he was gonna be starting to broadcast in the UK again. But yeah, I don't I think he says like I said, he said that he bailed because of the constraints,
Right.
and what probably a more professional environment where people probably said, "Hey, you can't say this kind of stuff." And
Right.
now he's in a place where there is no accountability.
Yeah.
Um, because he's on YouTube. There's no
Right.
accountability really on YouTube
Right, and
for
that's a choice for him because somebody like me is people don't know me. So, it makes sense for me to be independent. But if somebody if I had a team or if I had people that was willing to work with me and help me, I would definitely accept the help. And I
Yeah,
think that his producers seem pretty, they seem cordial, but that's their job. And I would say that in terms of I think that he's definitely probably the one controlling what gets said and what
oh, sure.
narratives. If I had one piece of advice to give Pierce Morgan, it would be this: as somebody with a PhD in psychology, learn to ask questions that are not leading questions. If you truly want to learn more about the world, right, in terms of journalism, in terms of any facet of life, you have to be willing to listen. And you can't listen when your question is phrased in a way where you think you already know the answer,
Right.
right?
And yeah. And I mean, when you look at stuff like that, the way questions are worded, that's a very common thing in legacy media. That's a common thing in how polling is done. We talked about that earlier. It's they phrase a question where they know almost like what they want the answer to be.
Right.
They're pretty close to like if we ask like this, they're going to respond like that. And
Right.
like, we all have had to do that with our moms,
Right.
you know what I'm saying, with our families. So, yeah, a lot of the problems we see in legacy media is the same things you see with Piers Morgan. When you're trying to discuss like issues of race or colonization or even the United States attempting to invade Venezuela. When I try to push back on that kind of stuff, they don't like it because I'm not framing the questions the way they frame the questions. I'm not making the same conclusions they're making. And that's a problem with just Western journalism in general,
Yeah.
and that's been built up from day one, particularly here in the US where
I tend to
during
think it's a
slavery and stuff.
dishon it's a to me, it's a dishonest
It's
form of
dishonest.
communication because
It
if you
is.
truly wanna learn, listen to someone make their point. Then the next step would be, if you wanna be honest, you respond to what that person said, not just what you feel like talking about, like how he
Right.
brought up the whole trans debate. Now, I didn't go on this show to debate trans people. I believe trans people have a right to live in dignity, right? But I didn't come on this show for that. I came on this show because I am an expert when it comes to racial issues in American
Right.
society.
Same,
And
yeah.
you wanted to know my opinion. and y'all kind of kept interrupting me, and just being very, obtuse. Like, confront the fact that I spit facts. I said that the violent
Right.
crime rate in DC dropped 31%, and in Baltimore and in Charlotte, 29%. That's substantial. And what that showed, that's more than a quarter. And so that's saving lives, right?
A
Those are
lot.
people that are alive. They wouldn't be alive if that had not been true. Now, what we need to do as a society, and I didn't even get to this point because they don't allow you to. But essentially, my point was we need, if you're serious, if this offends you, if seeing this stabbing offends you and hurts you, and you want something different, then we have to address systemic problems with systemic solutions. We can't just keep trying to individualize and cherry pick everything. Like I said, and they try to falsely equivocate. The whole they try to say that we should be giving as much press to this as George Floyd, just because of the death and it being public. And when I provided the example that the black woman last month in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and thankfully she survived, so I can tell y'all that. But a white man slit her throat on the train, and she was severely injured and put in critical care. And that her name actually has not been disclosed, but you can actually find the story by just looking up white man stabs Tulsa black woman in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And
Yeah.
he's awaiting trial right now because of what he did, and they're not talking about that story. And he told me, well, that's not the same because we don't have the video and his alleged audio. And I'm like, so it's not the same just because you don't want it to be the same. Like,
Right.
you said, your claim was that if everything was reversed, if the perpetrator was white and the victim was black, then the story would have got more press. And I provided you an example of someone who got their throat slashed last month, a black woman, and you didn't pay attention to that story, Pierce Morgan, and none of the other guests that you did either. So let's not pretend like it's black people that are selectively caring about things. First of all, I feel like as a subject matter expert, I don't feel like it's my responsibility to cover white homicides. So, unlike a lot of other people that just try to say, oh, well, I'm just covering everything, I'm not just covering everything. I'm a pro black journalist and I'm covering crimes that happen to black people. And while my sympathy may be with them, that is not my expertise. I also don't write a lot of LGBTQ stories because it's not my expertise. But I do read a lot of those stories. I'm in community with some of those writers, but that's not my lane. And it just kind of shows how anti journalistic he is because if you were, you would understand we all have a lane and he wasn't trying to understand what that lane is for us. I know for me that lane no, I don't write about random crimes that black men and black women do. I write about patterns of human behavior. I study psychology and sociology. So
Right.
if it was a pattern, if black men were routinely slitting the throats of white women, I would write about it. But that's not happening. And I want to be very clear about this, folks. During Jim Crow, this is the exact same rhetoric that was used. So during Jim Crow, white women would lie and say that black men raped them.
Yep.
Then white people in the town would lynch them. Perfect example would be the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. It all
Right.
started when a 19-year-old black man, teenager, Dick Rowland, was allegedly assaulted a white teenager, 17-year-old Sarah Page, in an elevator in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. She was an elevator girl and he was a shoe sign. So that's how they were in the same location at once. So essentially, white people wrote this inflammatory media report that said nab Negro for attacking girl in elevator. All the white people came running.
Yeah.
The Tulsa sheriff deputized 500 white men and boys, and literally, you can look up the Tulsa historical record. He told them, "Get a gun and get a nigger." That is what he told them. And they destroyed 35 blocks of Black Wall Street. There are reports of there being incendiary bombs dropped from the sky
Lord. Yeah.
from farming planes. Um, and the death toll is still unknown because of all the cover up that happened. But it's estimated between 300 and 500 Black people were killed that day. And so think of it like this: all of that started with one lie. Now, after the massacre, the white girl, the teenager, Sarah Page, came out and said, he never touched me. He never did anything to me. So all of these black people were killed. all of their hopes and dreams dashed because of a lie. So when I
Yeah.
push back against these false narratives, it's rooted in the fact that we've seen what happens during Jim Crow when we don't nip these false narratives in the bud. And if you look up the man allegedly responsible for this crime in particular, people online were calling for his lynching. Of course, I didn't get to talk about that on Piers Morgan's show, but ultimately that's not right. And if he were to be held accountable, and if I could ask him, I'd say, Piers Morgan, well, do you denounce those calling for his lynching? Do you believe this man deserves a fair trial? You yourself said he had mental health problems. In our government, I don't know about the UK, but I can tell you that here, if someone is not mentally able, they are not fit to stand trial, and they will not be held accountable in the fantasy way that you want them to be held accountable in. So how
Right.
can you on one hand say, I acknowledge he has mental health problems, and on the other end be denying, right? Be denying and be trying to make it seem like everything he did is intentional. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, oh, he sought out and hunted a white girl, and on the other hand saying he's schizophrenic. Now, for those who are listening, right? You might not be in psych, you might not know what schizophrenia is. You might think it's crazy. In psych, we don't use that term. That's not a real medical term. Schizophrenia is an illness in which a lot of people have hallucinations. Sometimes this is visual, sometimes this is auditory, but the key thing is a lot of them have trouble distinguishing between reality and not. So one of the things Piers Morgan said that I found interesting is you acknowledge that he was allegedly schizophrenic, right? So then how then can you say he was of sound mind to intentionally harm
Right.
another person?
Right. He
But I
didn't,
can't I wasn't allowed to say that.
something happened. Like if you watch the video, when she sat down, something happened in his mind because he immediately looked irritated for some reason. And it could be anything. And the problem with what Pierce Morgan does, and Charlie Kirk and so many other people, Pierce Morgan may not be as far as like what you discussed about the Tulsa race massacre, saying go lynch somebody, but he comes dangerously close. He comes dangerously close. Are you still there? My screen went black. So yeah, if this is still on, I just want to say that Pierce Morgan comes dangerously close to being that person who starts a race massacre because essentially he's promoting a narrative that will eventually lead to that. That could eventually lead to something like that. You know, we look at Emmett Till, a lie, people bought it, and look what happened. It's happened countless times throughout history, and he comes dangerously close to that, to being that guy. Can you guys still see me? I think Allison's phone